Hi, my name is Amarissa, and you're about to watch a message that was preached right here at Calvary in Miramar, Florida. As a church, we exist to help people take their next step with God. If you want to know more about Calvary, please download our mobile app by searching My Calvary on the Google Play or App Store.
How's everybody doing? We are glad that you're here. So yesterday, I'm in line at the pharmacy at Publix. Tell you about why later today. I will tell you today, but I'll tell you later. But for whatever reason, as I'm standing in line, I started reading the back of a Q-tip box. I don't know why I did this, but I started reading the Q-tip box, and I started thinking about how many Q-tips I've used in my 45 years of life. Which, by the way, then I got my phone and calculated it. It's just over 35,000, which I know you wanted to know. So, but what's weird about a Q-tip box is that on the box, it says this is not to be used on your ears. And it has a picture. You got to do this. Next time you go to Publix or Target or something, or if you go to Walmart, Purgatory, you can go there. And so you go, and you'll see it. It has actually a picture of like a baby's foot, and then don't use this in your ears, and it has a picture of a Q-tip like this. And it's like, what is that Q-tip going to do on like a baby's ankle? And then it has like a close-up of a person's face, and then someone going like if you got something on your face, just go like that. You don't need a Q-tip. Anyway, because I started thinking about if I actually followed the rules of the Q-tip box, I would not have used 35,000 Q-tips in my life. Do you know how many I would have used? 0. That's correct. I heard someone whisper 0, but I wouldn't have heard it because all the earwax would have had me clogged, and I wouldn't even have been able to know. That's the problem. And here's the thing. So I'm thinking about all this, and I'm like, if I would have gone by the rules, I wouldn't have used it. Which reminds me of this friend that I had in high school who actually obeyed the Q-tip box because this guy had literally candles growing out of his ears. And it was bad. I mean, he was a good guy. We lived across the street from each other, and he just, didn't use, he wasn't on that tip, on the Q-tip, And so he just called everything by the wrong name, and obviously, it's just, he couldn't hear anything. So when I introduced, my wife and I started dating, I introduced him to my wife. I'm like, hey, this is my wife, Carrie. And he's like, hey, nice to meet you, Corey. And I'm like, no. And I'm like, dude, her name is Carrie. He's like, yeah, that's what I said, Corey. Anyway, it's just, okay, whatever. And so, so one day, we're going out. And my first car, what I drove in high school, was a 1982 Volkswagen Rabbit diesel. That's what I was driving. My friend Al Brown, my best friend in high school, his name is Alan Brown. He drove a Camaro. So whenever we went out, we took his car. Because if Camaro was one of the options, we're going in the Camaro. So anyway, and because I didn't have any money to give for gas, I always had to sit in the back. So it was Alan Brown in the front, my friend Drew in the riding shotgun. I was right behind the passenger seat. My buddy with the ear problem was going to remain anonymous. And then my friend Jordy is on the other side. So we're in the back seat. Now, if you've been in a Camaro before, these are like tight quarters. So we're like sardined in the back seat. So I turned to my buddy and I'm like, hey, listen, and he's like, what? And I'm like, how in the world can you not hear? I'm like literally speaking directly into your ears, like literally inches away. And he's like, I don't know, I didn't hear it. So I don't know what got into me, but I just said, that's it. And I told my friend Al, and I said, I want you to go inside, and I want you to get as many Q-tips as you can find and a bottle of rubbing alcohol. So he goes, this is a true story, by the way. He goes in his house, comes out with a handful of Q-tips and rubbing alcohol, and I start dunking the Q-tips in the rubbing alcohol, and I start cleaning out this guy's ears. This is a true story. My friend Jordy on the other side of me, after halfway through, he opens the door and throws up. Now, in Jordy's defense, I did make him hold the used Q-tips after I was done. So, just, all right. So, 21 Q-tips later, this kid could hear a pin drop in Palm Beach County And he, it was amazing. It was amazing. And so anytime people ask me, and if you've been here at Calvary, I've told the story a few times, but anytime someone asks me to define what friendship is, I tell them about the back seat of that Camaro. 21 Q-tips and a bottle of rubbing alcohol is my definition of friendship. Because listen, and here's the thing is that, and I understand that in the culture that we live, friendship is just, they're my friend. And you meet somebody 3 times and you say that they're your friend. And then there's also online friends, like Facebook friends. You can even be friends with your enemies. I am friends with my nemesis from high school. And to this day, I scroll and I see, and I still get like a weird feeling every time I see his face. And it says we're friends. And it's like just barely, because I have, anyway. And it's not that I'm supposed to love everybody. I do love everyone. There's just some people that I want to love from a distance. And so anyway, but here's the thing that's important for us to understand is that friendship in the Hebrew culture was not just a word that we throw around, like we throw around the word friendship now. Friendship in the Hebrew culture that Jesus was born into was a covenant relationship. It was a brother-like bond. And so when you read the Bible and it talks about friendship, it's not talking about somebody that you sat next to in 7th grade math. No, this was your brother. This was your sister. This is the person who was there at the most important moments of your life, the person who was there at the lowest moments of your life. And the reality is that for all of us, every single one of us who is a Christian, especially those of us that are Christians that want to grow, we have to have at least one of these. Really more, but at least one of these kind of relationships. So 2 weeks ago, we started a series that we're calling 5. And the reason we call it 5 is because when we talk about spiritual growth and how does a person go from infancy spiritually to maturity spiritually, there's usually these 5 catalysts that help us grow to maturity. Because when we were kids, growing physically was pretty easy, right? You eat, you sleep, you run around during recess, and growth is almost automatic. But then you become a Christian, and the markers aren't quite so clear. Now, in the beginning, we feel like we're growing because we're hearing things for the very first time. You're hearing Bible stories. You're hearing teaching for the very first time. But then after a season, we start thinking that we're stuck because, well, I've heard that Bible story before. I've memorized some verses. I've learned the lyrics to the songs. And I'm wondering, is this all that there is? Well, the good news is this isn't all that there is. The bad news is most of the growth that happens for us as Christians happens in the places that we tend to avoid, and that's why we find ourselves somewhat stunted. And so because if you're a Christian, you want to grow. You want to take on the challenges of life. You want to be able to make the wise choices even when you're tempted not to. You want to be able to trust God no matter what. And the thing that we have to understand is that spiritual growth is a journey. It's a process. That's why at Calvary, our mission statement has been for a very, very long time that we want to help people take their next step with God. Because even if you're not a Christian, you have a next step to take with God. Even if you've been a Christian for years and years, you have a next step to take in your relationship with God. And so, but growth only happens when we're intentional about growing. And so, what are these 5 catalysts that we talk about? If you were with us last time, you heard them. So and if you weren't, I'll do the review real quick. So here's the first of these 5 catalysts. Number 1 is practical teaching. And that is Bible teaching that we understand that helps us get from where we are to where we need to go. Number 2 is providential relationships, and that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about today. This is when you meet someone who's walking the journey with you, and they somehow kind of show up. It's the right person who shows up at the right time, and then our life changes because we're influenced to do the right thing and grow in our relationship with God. The third is what we call private disciplines. This is where we learn to pray, study the Bible, where you start obeying God publicly through what you learn privately. Number 4 is personal ministry, and this is the part of the story where someone says, that's when they challenged me to teach that class. That's when I started leading that group. That's when I started serving in that ministry. And it was this moment where we stepped out of our comfort zone and started serving others. And then number 5 were what we call pivotal circumstances. And these are the moments of difficulty when we had to trust God because there were just no other options. And so what I want to do is spend some time today talking about providential relationships. And that is people who show up at just the right moment in our lives, and our walk with God is strengthened, and we make wiser choices because of it. Because every person who's mature has that story of them maturing in the faith because a person came along and just encouraged us at the right moment, walked with us, or continues to walk with us. And because the reality is that life in general never influences us upward. Have you ever noticed that? Life never influences us to be better in general. It usually influences us downward. It's people that influence us upward. And I felt this just recently. So last week, we were at a couples retreat. If you were here, if you were not there, but we were at a couples retreat last week. And so on Saturday, after the sessions, they give us the whole afternoon off. And so my wife and I went to lunch, and then I said, hey, could we go to the Apple store they just opened a new Apple store in Naples. So we went over there. Now, the whole way there, I was telling her how I was not going to get the new iPhone this time, and it's just because they make it faster, and I don't need another camera and all this. And then I walked in, and so I'm like, I just want to see the store. I'm not interested in the phone. I'm actually disappointed in Apple, and I'm so expressing all this. And then I held the phone in my hand, and I felt a sensation run through my body. It was so physical, like this sensation, and the sensation is called coveting, by the way. And so I started feeling this sensation to where my wife said to me, "Are you okay?" And I guess when you start kind of shivering a little bit, she's like, "Are you cold?" I'm like, "No, this is the visceral reaction of coveting." And so anyway, I had to leave the phone, drop it like it's hot, and then just walk out. And never look back. And I mean, it's the weirdest thing. Why? Because all of us are being influenced. All of us are being influenced in our lives, but people are influencing us and really have the greatest impact than anyone else. Now, the Apostle Paul, and I try to tell his story every time I reference him because I think it's so powerful. And if you're newer here, I want to give you kind of a frame of context. So the Apostle Paul was a guy who was a Jewish leader, imprisoned Christians, hated Christians, then had this encounter with Jesus, became a Christian, and then became a Christian leader. So he's kind of lived on both sides. And he writes this letter to this group of young Christians, and here's what he says to them. He says, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." And listen, this principle will either work for us or against us. And you don't even have to be a Christian to know that this is 100% true. Because whenever you've seen someone go off the rails and you're like, "Hey man, what happened to so-and-so?" And then here's how the story begins. "Well, he started hanging out with these people." Like, okay, now we know. "Hey, what happened to so-and-so? They're doing so well." Well, it's interestingly enough, they started going to this church. They started going to this Bible study. They started hanging out with this group of people. And then this thing, and once again, the trajectory turns upward. And it's really all because of the people that they decided to be around. Now listen, every few weeks we do a baptism out here. And if you've never stuck around for baptism, you should. It's really an amazing experience. But one of the things that I just find so encouraging is that nobody goes into the water to get baptized and they're just like by themselves. Right? They always have a group of friends, family, people that have encouraged them and helped them get to the place where they want to make the decision as an adult to obey Jesus and be baptized, right? And there's always this group of people that cheer, that hug them, they're crying. I mean, it's such an emotional moment. Why? Because we don't take these significant steps in our walk with God in a vacuum. We always do it because people are influencing us and taking us to new levels. And so what I want to do in our time together is I want to eavesdrop on a conversation that Jesus has with his disciples. Now, this is, to me, it's one of my favorite areas of the Bible because it's so powerful, because when Jesus is knowing that he's going to the cross, I mean, this is the night before he is crucified. And so I want you to think about that. Like, what would you want to say to the people that you're closest to the night before you're going to be crucified? Now, this is what theologians call the upper room discourse. It's from John 13 through 17, where they have the Passover together, and then Jesus just starts speaking to his disciples these things that are most important. And as they leave the upper room, they're going to be walking from the upper room to a garden called Gethsemane. And then in the Garden of Gethsemane in John 17, he's going to pray this amazing prayer. And there he's going to be betrayed. He's going to be arrested. He's going to go through 6 mock trials. And by the next morning, he'll be on the cross being crucified. But what's amazing to me is that he spends about 25% of this conversation from the upper room to the Garden of Gethsemane talking about friendship and what friendship is, what kind of friend you should be, what kind of friend he's been to them, what kind of friend they should be to others. You see, it's so powerful because we know what's going to happen. And so I believe, we need to listen to these words and take these words to heart, because Jesus is going to model what kind of friend you want, and he's going to model for us what kind of friend you and I should be. So we're going to start in John 15. In verse 9, here's what we read. As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. Now, if you pause there and give me your attention. So here's number one if you're a note taker, and that is that find a friend who faithfully walks with God. Now, I'm not saying that somebody just says they're a Christian. I'm saying you're watching their life, and God is at work in their life. You see what God is doing in their life, and they just keep growing and growing and growing. And the result of that, right? Jesus says this, if you keep my commands, my joy is going to be in you, and then your joy is going to be full. Now, when it says your joy is going to be full, I don't want you to think about like when you're doing laundry and you open up the little drawer and then you just kind of pour the detergent until it says the line means it's full. No. You ever been pouring and then you're having a conversation and then like the thing starts overflowing because it's too much? That's what we're talking about. If you want a better picture of what he means by full to the point of overflowing, anybody ever eat too much on Thanksgiving? Okay, it's a couple honest people. The rest are struggling with lying. All right. You ever eat so much on Thanksgiving that after dinner you have to unbutton your pants? Okay. You ever eat so much at Thanksgiving that beforehand you knew you were going to do it, so you wore sweatpants to your family's house? And you couldn't even move. And then you were like, well, I did that, but I could probably just do a little bit of dessert. And then you go for a little bit more. And this is what happens, right? This is the kind of joy that Jesus is offering, a joy that overflows. Because there really is a joy that comes from knowing God, experiencing God work on your behalf, and doing things for you that you could never do for yourself. This is the kind of friend that will work with you and walk with you and share truth in a loving way. You see, they just have a joy about them. They're not trying to just smash you every time you make a mistake. They're trying to encourage you. See, when the Apostle John, who was one of the followers of Jesus, when he was writing his gospel and he was trying to describe Jesus, here's what he says. He says, the Word, Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. That was the description that he had of Jesus, that he was filled to the top, overflowing with grace and truth. That he's the kind of friend that isn't going to use truth as a weapon. Instead, he's going to use grace to lead us to truth. Now, this is an important thing for us to know. Why? Because not all friendships are created equal. Not all friendships can you have the intense type of conversation depending on what's going on. And that's why there's certain relationship gauges that you have to understand. And if you've been with us for a while, I shared this several years ago, but this is what I talk about when I talk about relationships. That is that the length of time plus the depth of relationship equals the level of intensity. And you already know this to be the case. Now, you've never worded it like this, but you know this to be the case. That's why when someone you don't know says something to you to kind of challenge you, what do you say? You say, you don't know me, because the length of time that you've known each other and the depth of relationship, you're going beyond the depth or the level of intensity. You recognize that. The other thing that you know is that when someone who loves you says something to challenge you, you know what you do? You say, thank you. Because the level of time that you've known them, a long time, and the depth of relationship, you guys are good friends, that you can actually be more intense with them, and they will actually love you for it. And when you've been on the receiving end of it, you appreciate it. Now, a few years ago, I was walking in this parking lot with my wife. Now, the reason I was walking in the parking lot, I was walking to my car because I had just eaten at Steak and Shake, the one on Pines going east. And some of you are like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Been there. Frequented. I have the membership card. All right. So I'm walking in the parking lot, and if you've been there, you know that just a few doors down, there's a Gold's Gym. So this is around the time that Gold's Gym had just opened. And so we're walking out of Steak and Shake, and then there's a salesman for Gold's Gym walking around trying to get people to agree to like a trial membership. And so now at the time, I weighed about 280 pounds. And so we're walking, and I had just left Steak and Shake. So who knows how much more I weighed on that day. So I'm walking to my car, and the salesman comes over and he says, hey, do you have a gym membership? Which, while I appreciate the question, I think the assumption would be no. All right. So there was more chance that I had a slim gym in my pocket than having a gym membership in my wallet. So anyway, and I said no. And then he said, he tells me all the benefits of joining, and I'm politely declined. And then he says to me, look, man, you're like 50 pounds overweight. You need this membership. Now, at that moment, I thought several things. I felt several things. I was planning to do several things. And it was my thought of all of you that kept me from doing, saying, and engaging in all of those several things. Because the thing I was like, I'm going to do this, and then there's going to be I'm going to get arrested. And then there's going to be this, the Sun Sentinel is going to have this thing, local pastor knocks out scrawny salesman in a parking lot. Anyway, so over Steak and Shake membership, because the media always gets it wrong. And there's always like some weird fact in there, local pastor won't share shake. And it's always something strange that happens. So anyway, so I say to him, I'm like, is that your strategy for getting new members? And he's like, no, that's not what I meant. And I'm like, hey man, our relationship is over. And I walked away. And here's the thing that happens. Why? Because you didn't know me. And we have no relationship, so there's no way that we can have that level of intensity. And by the way, I was way more overweight than 50 pounds, so the joke's on you, buddy. And so you thought you knew anything about me. I was way fatter than you thought. And so anyway, but here's the thing is that friends will confront us. Listen, not because they want something from you, but because they want something for you. And because they want something for you, it actually strengthens the relationship. So Jesus goes on in verse 12, and he says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you. If you pause there and give me your attention, here's the second thing you need to know about friends, and that is find friends who give more than take. Listen, Jesus' definition of love in these verses is not that we love any way that we want. His definition of love is that we love the way that he loved. We've talked about this in the past, that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount that we treat others the way that we want to be treated. That's the golden rule. But, right, do unto others the way you want to be treated. That's the golden rule. But Jesus is saying that you love one another as I have loved you. So I don't treat others the way I want to be treated. I treat others the way Jesus has treated me. That's the platinum rule. And so the thing is that a real friend is someone who will sacrifice for you. And that's the model, right? That's the model for friendship. It's the model for marriage. It's the model for parenting. And if you have a friend who's always taking and never giving in the relationship, you don't have a friend. You have a flesh-eating bacteria. And you got to shed yourself of that and take an antibiotic and get rid of that. But friendship, I love C.S. Lewis, and once again, you should read everything C.S. Lewis writes, but C.S. Lewis has a book that I particularly love. It's called The Four Loves. And he talks about love in these different facets, but one chapter is just on the subject of friendship. And I love his definition of how friendship begins. That friendship begins, according to Lewis, when two people say, really? Me too. That there's like this instant commonality that friendship begins. But for friendship To flourish, there has to be investment in both directions. And so that's why Solomon, who was the king of Israel, wisest man in the world up until that time, here's what he says in Proverbs. He says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. And listen, that's the kind of friend who's like, hey, I'm willing to lay down what I desire. I'm willing to be sacrificial, and I'm not going to leave when things get difficult. That's the kind of friend that you want. A couple of weeks ago, I went grocery shopping, and I put some stuff in our fridge out in the garage. And by the way, if you don't have a fridge in your garage, like, you need to think that through. If I had to choose between owning a car and having my fridge in the garage, I would be taking Uber everywhere because I'm not giving up the fridge in the garage, all right? So anyway, so I put a bunch of stuff in the fridge in the garage, and then I put the rest inside in the kitchen, but I forgot to close the garage door. So now, like, hours have gone by, and I have forgotten to close the garage door. So then later that evening, I asked my 7-year-old daughter, Livy, hey, could you put something in the, I have a little workbench in my garage. And she says, I said, Livy, could you just put this on the workbench and I'll deal with it, I'll organize it later. So she goes out there, and then she comes running back in, and she says, Dad, there's a frog in our garage. Now it's evening, so it's, the night's out, the sun's gone down and lights are out, but it's getting kind of dark. But I go into the garage. Sure enough, there's a frog that's like the size of my fist in the garage. So I'm like, all right, I'll take care of this. So I get a broom, and I just kind of get close to it and kind of start sweeping. And no frogs were hurt in the making of this story. And so the frog kind of gets swept out of the garage and goes back to Miss Piggy or wherever it lives, and whoever it does life with. And so, but then as I'm sweeping it out, I realize that a snake has gotten into my garage. And it's kind of in the corner there, and I'm trying to get it out. So now, at this point in time, it's only Livy and I outside. And so I'm trying to I go to tell Livy, I'm like, go inside, and there's like this pole that I want to get so that I can get the snake. I don't want to leave because I don't know where the thing's going to go. I've got it kind of in this corner, and so I'm thinking that if I can just kind of get it and kind of shoo it out or kill it, whatever. So Livy goes inside, and I'm like, listen, whatever you do, don't tell your mom. Because if you tell your mom, it's going to become a thing. And I don't want it to become a thing, and we're going to tell her. We're just not going to tell her now. This is what I like to call time-released truth. Right? We are going to tell the truth at the appropriate moment, right? If you've had Advil, all the pain reliever is time released, all right? Truth sometimes can be time released, all right? So we're going to tell the truth when it's the right moment. And by that, I mean several days from now. Anyway, so she goes in, and I'm like, so just go in and get the thing. And I'm like, just act natural, all right? Just act natural. So she goes in, and I don't, and she's like acting robotic, and Carrie comes out, and she's like, Livy, what are you doing? She's like, nothing's wrong. What do you think something's going on in the garage? Everything's fine. Why are you asking me all these questions? Why do you have that pole? I don't know. I just thought I needed one for something I have going on in the garage. Oh. And so anyway, so then in this commotion, now Carrie comes out. Mia comes out, Xander comes out, and then they find out there's a snake, and now it's turned into a thing, which is what I was trying to keep once with because of the time-released truth. You're going to use that later. Enjoy. So anyway, so now the little pole thing didn't work, and the snake gets behind all of my hurricane shutters. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to move all these hurricane shutters to get to this snake. And then they're like, well, why don't you just leave it until tomorrow? And I'm like, I can't leave it till tomorrow. Right now, I know where it is. If I leave it till tomorrow, it will find a way to open the door and kill me in my sleep. Have you not seen any of the Jurassic Park movies? This is exactly what happens in all the Jurassic Park movies, right? They learn how to open the doors, they start cracking codes on the computer, and then next thing you know, people die. So I'm like, I can't do that. I got to deal with this now. So, but I said, Carrie, Carrie, why don't you go in with the kids and I'll just deal with it. And my daughter, Livy, is like, we're not leaving you alone in this fight. We're going to take on the snake together. And I'm like, all right. And And Carrie's like, yeah, let's stay together. And Xander's like, yeah, let's stay together. And Mia's like, oh, I was going to go inside, actually. And but I guess I'll just hang out. Once again, this is part of what happens when you have around a good group of people. They encourage you to do the right thing. So anyway, so now I've got to actually, so before I move all the hurricane shutters, I have this idea. I'm like, why don't I try to blast it out? So I get a hose, and I'm just trying to blast the thing out. And that doesn't work, and now my garage is soaking wet. And so the other thing that you need to know is that I hurt my shoulder a couple months ago. So I have tendonitis in my shoulder, and so, which I know it looks totally normal, but it's I'm in a lot of pain. So whenever I try to, I can like lift certain things like in, controlled motions, but I don't know about your hurricane shutters, but my hurricane shutters each weigh about 1,000 pounds. And so now I'm moving it, I'm hurting my shoulder, and then my son is he's trying to move some. And so, but I've been going to, I'll tell you this just to tell you, I've been going to physical therapy for my shoulder. But when people on the Calvary staff ask, like, hey, is Pastor Bob coming in today? One of them will go like, oh no, he's at therapy this morning, and then he'll be in. And they're like, wow, so good, he's getting help. And it's like, it's physical therapy, by the way. The counseling and shock therapy, that's scheduled for later in the week. And so anyway, so now I'm lifting shutters, and then my son's lifting shutters, and then, there's no light. So now it's like I've got flashlights out, phone lights that people are trying to, and so anyway, so we're doing all this. Anyway, I get down to the last two shutters because the snake wasn't polite enough to be in the front shutters. He had to go all the way in the back. So I get to the last two, and I say, look, why don't you guys all go inside, and I'll get this, because I know that once I pull this out, the snake's going to come out. So, and then Livy, once again, my spokesperson, she's like, we are not leaving you alone with a snake. We're in this fight together. And then I turn, and she's holding a hammer in her hand. And Mia is like, Livy, what are you going to do with a hammer? And I'm like, why don't you throttle it back, Thor? And I don't know what was weirder, her holding a hammer or my son holding a screwdriver. Like, what are you gonna do? Attach an outlet plate to it? And so anyway, that was not helpful. So anyway, so they put the stuff down. I pull the last shutter out, and the snake, the snake's not huge. It's maybe 12, 15 inches long. But it kind of comes up and starts like hissing at me. And my son hits me, and I turn around, and he's holding a shovel. So he hands me the shovel, and I smashed that snake into oblivion until his guts came out. And I got to tell you, it felt fantastic. And it really did. It felt great, and it felt biblical. It did, like crushing the snake. I feel like there's a verse about like crushing the snake in your garage, right? And go back to hell, demon snake. And anyway, but listen, so this is what you're looking for. You're looking for people who are going to stick with you no matter what. That's why, once again, Solomon, again, he says this. He says, many will say they are loyal friends, but who can find one who is truly reliable? This is why you have to put yourself. He's like, man, I want to find friends like that. I want to find people like that who are always going to be with me, stand with me. Then here's what you've got to do. You've got to put yourself in environments where friendships can flourish. That's why at Calvary we talk about getting into a circle. You see, these chairs are all set up in rows so you can hear the teaching. But you get involved in a group where all the chairs are in circles, and then you're not just hearing the teaching, you're hearing each other. And this is where friendships can form and also transform us. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to grab your connection card that you got when you came in. If you can grab it right now. And then you got a catalog that shows all of our small groups that we're doing, all of our growth groups. And here's the thing that I want you to know is that typically in our growth groups, it's all different people teaching, and which it is this time, but it's usually all different curriculum. And what we decided to do this time, because we felt like this series was so important, was we decided that we were going to do write our own curriculum for all the groups based on the teaching and kind of go a little bit further, because there's stuff that I actually have to cut that gets written and then I don't get a chance to share. And so you can look at all the different groups. There are groups happening every night of the week. Some are happening here, some are happening in homes, but find the day that works for you, the location that works for you, and then on the back of your connection card, sign up for a group. Because one of the things that cannot happen is that you cannot grow to maturity alone. It is literally an impossibility. And every time I talk to someone who doesn't get involved in a group, they don't serve, they don't meet people, like, I just want to come in and be low profile, I want to come in and see the service, and then I want to leave. And I'll tell people that, and I'm like, listen, I just want you to know where that strategy leads. And here's what it leads. It leads to two things. And you can mark it on your calendar. Within 3 months, you won't be coming to Calvary anymore. Within 6 months, you most likely won't even be walking with God anymore. And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, I'm just telling you. I've watched this happen over and over and over again. And it's not just like, yeah, but I already have friends. It's not just having friends. Like, everybody has friends. It's having friends who are going to help you grow in your walk with God. Because every mature person, every story of a person who grows in their faith has part of their story is, I met someone, I met a group of people, and that person, that group of people catapulted my faith to new levels. Last thing, verse 15, then we're done. He says this, no longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain. And whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. These things I command you, that you love one another. And if you pause there and give me your attention, here's the last thing I want to share with you, and that is find a friend who believes you have what it takes. A friend who believes you have what it takes. Listen, Jesus was their rabbi. He was their teacher. But when we talk about a teacher or a rabbi, we think in terms of dispensing information. And that's one piece of it. But being a rabbi was much more than that. Following a rabbi meant that this was the person that you wanted to be like. You followed a rabbi because you believed that that rabbi's teachings, that his interpretation of God's law, that his lifestyle was the best possible way to live. And you would do everything to be just like the rabbi. And that's why, listen, Jesus' disciples knew how to pray. But the disciples said, Lord, will you teach us to pray? Teach us how to pray how you pray. Why? And here's the reason. Because John the Baptist taught his disciples how to pray. And so now, it's not that they knew how to pray, but they want to be able to pray just like him. Now, here's the important thing to understand. In that culture, you picked your rabbi. In ancient Israel, it wasn't unusual for a rabbi to have a crowd of young men that followed him everywhere, that wanted to be like him. And because they decided that's the person who is most faithful to the Torah and his interpretations of God's laws are best, and I want to be the most like him. But not every disciple, not every student made the cut. And so some would get sent home because the rabbi was looking for the best of the best. And so the rabbi would take some that weren't making the cut, and he would put his hand on them, and he would bless them, and he would say, bless you, my son, and now I release you to go into the family trade. And this was the rabbi's way of saying, this is the end of the road. Now it's time for you to go home. You didn't make the cut. You weren't quite good enough. And so they would head home. So by the age of 15 or 16, these young men would go home, get into the family business because they had followed the rabbi for a certain amount of time and then been told that that was it. They weren't one of the best. Because the desire of every rabbi was to perpetuate his yoke. The yoke is a term that means his interpretation of the Torah. And so what he's saying is that he's only picking people that could be the absolute best. Every time a rabbi took on a disciple, he's asking himself the question, can this person be like me? Now here's what makes this section so powerful, what we just read, is that Jesus tells his disciples, you didn't choose me. I chose you. That's not the normal arrangement of things. Jesus saying that he chose them is unheard of in that culture. In fact, in all of Jewish history, there's only one other rabbi that's known to have chosen his own disciples, a guy who was around about 50 years before Jesus, a rabbi named Hillel, who's very well known. But he's the only other rabbi in Jewish history that has chosen his own disciples other than Jesus of Nazareth. Now, but if a rabbi believed that the student could be like him, he would say two words to the potential disciple. He would say, "Follow me." So, in the Gospel of Matthew, who's a disciple of Jesus, who has this similar kind of encounter with Jesus, he writes an account of Jesus' life, and look at what he says. He says this, "And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen." Now pause there for a second. The fact that they are fishing means they have already been rejected by a rabbi. They've already been told to the rabbi in a very nice way, "You're not the best of the best. You're not good enough. Go into the family business." So, here's what happens. "And then Jesus said to them, 'Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men.' Then immediately they left their nets and followed him. Going from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets, and he called them. And immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him." Now, when I first became a Christian, I didn't understand this. I mean, this seemed so kind of chaotic to me because I see, Zebedee, their father, and James and John kind of working together in the family business. Jesus shows up and says, "Hey, why don't you follow me?" And they just drop everything. And I always kind of thought that there was this conversation that didn't get included in the Bible, which was Zebedee saying, "Will you get back here and get back to work and stop fooling around? We got stuff to do." But that's actually not what happens. What happens is that it's so far from the truth. You see, what probably happened is he goes home that night by himself. And when he walks in the door, Mrs. Zebedee says, "Hey, where are James and John?" And he kind of smiles a little bit. And he says, "Boys aren't coming home tonight." Well, why? Or where are they? He says, "You see, the rabbi from Galilee came. And he told our boys to follow him." And I'm sure that there was this outbreak of emotion in their house because they knew that Jesus of Nazareth had come to their boys and said, "I believe that these two boys have what it takes." Every time Jesus says, "Follow me," to someone, they leave everything and follow him because he's telling them, "I believe you have what it takes to be like me." Listen, that's the kind of friend that you need. Someone who's going to speak life into your future. And it's the kind of person, not just that we need, it's the kind of person that we need to be. And those kind of people come into our lives when we put ourselves in the kind of environments where those relationships can form. I told you a few weeks ago, about my friend Steve, who gave me a Bible on my 16th birthday. And if you were here, you remember that. And I wasn't a Christian. He became a Christian in the 9th or 10th grade. And so I told that story. And a woman in our church heard the story and said, "Wow, that's..." And I talked about that. He had, if you remember the story, his family had immigrated here from South Korea, and they had gone to, they went to this Korean fellowship church in Miami and whatnot. And that we had lost touch. Like, I had never spoken to him after high school. Or after our first year, he came home for Christmas, first year of college, and I ran into him. Well, anyway, she attends our 10 o'clock service, and after the service, she goes home and she says, "It's funny, I know a guy named Steve who's about Pastor Bob's age. And I think, because they used to work together," he says, "I think I remember him hearing stories about how they lived, he went to high school in Coral Springs." So she calls him up that night and says, "Hey, Steve, do you remember a guy by the name of Bob Franquez. And he goes, man, that sounds familiar, but I can't place it. And he says, I was, and so as they're talking, he Googles me, and he comes upon my handsome face, and he says, I know Bob. We went to high school together. And she says, well, Bob is the senior pastor of the church that I go to. And he says, Bob is the what of where? Yeah, Bob is a pastor. And he's like, you're kidding. And so she says, yeah, he talked about you and talked about the Bible that you gave him. He says, I remember giving him that Bible. And so 2 weeks ago on our anniversary service, Steve was at our 10 o'clock service. And I saw him for the first time in almost 30 years. And we went upstairs to my office and took this picture. That's Steve and I with the Bible that he gave me almost 30 years ago. And I said to him, I said, you know, I want to say something to you that I should have told you a long time ago. And thank you. I don't know why you chose to invest in me. And I asked him, like, how many of these did you give out? He goes, just the one to you. Of all of our friends, he goes, just the one I gave to you. And I said, listen, I was not as appreciative as I should have been. And I want you to know that I've never forgotten this, and that it made a huge difference in my life. I wasn't ready, but 3 years later, I came to know Jesus. And I want to thank you for investing in me when I had no interest in knowing God. I wasn't looking for God. But even when I was 16 years old, God was looking for me. See, it was guys like Steve, it was guys like my next door neighbor, Bill, that I've told you about him. He's the guy that I'd walk next. Every time I had filled a legal pad full of questions, I'd walk over and ask him some questions about the Bible. Now, if I didn't say this, Steve wasn't, Bill, he wasn't a pastor, he was a construction guy. He worked in construction, but he was just a faithful guy that loved Jesus and cared about me. And so this is a few years ago. I spoke at my old church, the church I grew up in spiritually. And after the service, it was an amazing service, and it was so good. Everything, so many people came to know Jesus. And then afterwards, there's this line of people that wanted to talk to me, and so I talked to everybody. And at the end of the line is this guy. He's wearing construction boots, and he's got like a uniform, like one of those gray button-down uniforms, and on the chest here it says Bill. And he walks up and he says, hey Bob, do you remember me? And man, I started to cry. I hugged him and I said, not only do I remember you, but I don't know where I'd be without you. My friends, these are the people that we need in our lives, because that's how we grow, and these are the people that we need to become in the lives of other people, because when God brings the right person at just the right moment, the whole trajectory of your life changes. And that's what God wants to do in your life. And what you have to do, there's just one thing you have to do, and that is put yourself in the environment where these kinds of relationships can happen. Let's pray together. Lord, thanks so much for orchestrating the people who've helped us. And we know for some of us, you're already orchestrating the people who can come into our lives and take our faith to the next level. And so, God, I just pray for each of us that we would make a decision to put ourselves in the environment where we can see these kind of relationships flourish and grow and be taken to a new level. So help us. Help Calvary to be this place where all of us take that step to know you better. And we pray it in Jesus' name, and everybody said, amen.
Thanks for watching this week's message. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below, and we'll make sure to keep you up to date with everything that's happening here at Calvary. God bless you.